Ron Paul Report, Newsletter Controversy. Paul's newsletters, which date back to 1978 and has been widely, variously titled Ron Paul's Freedom Report, Ron Paul's Political Report, the Ron Paul Survival Report, and the Ron Paul Investment Letter, first became an issue in his 1996 run for Congress against Charles Morris. Morris ran numerous attack ads about Paul's newsletters, which included derogatory comments concerning race and other politicians, alluding to a 1992 study finding that, quote, a black man in Washington, about 85% are arrested at some time and point in their lives. The newsletter proposed assuming that 95% of black males in Washington, D.C. are semi-criminal or entirely criminal, and stated that the criminals who terrorize our cities largely are, quote, young black males who commit crimes and are all out of proportion of their numbers. In 2001, Paul took moral responsibility for the comments printed in the newsletter under his name, telling Texas Monthly magazine that the comments were written by an unnamed ghostwriter and did not represent his views. He said newsletter remarks referring to U.S. Representative Barbara Jordan, calling her a fraud and a half-educated victimologist, were, quote, the saddest thing because Barbara and I served together and actually she was a delightful lady. The magazine defended Paul's decision to protect the writer's confidence in 1996, concluding that, quote, in 4 terms as a U.S. congressman in 1 presidential race, Paul had never uttered anything remotely like this. In 2007, with the quotes resurfacing, the New York Times Magazine writer Christopher Caldwell concurred that Paul denied the allegations quite believably, since the style diverges widely from his own, but added that Paul's response to the accusations was not transparent. In 2008, January of 2008, the contents of Paul's newsletters made news again when James Kirchick of the New Republic published a story detailing the contents of various Paul newsletters. Kirchick said that the writings showed, quote, an obsession with conspiracy, sympathy for the right-wing militia movement, and deeply held bigotry, end quote. A 1990 issue of the Ron Paul Political Report stated that homosexuals, not to speak of the rest of society, were far better off when social pressure forced them to hide their activities. After the 1992 Los Angeles riots, the newsletter referred to African American writers as barbarians and suggested that the riots only stopped when it came time for blacks to pick up their welfare checks. Other issues gave tactical advice to right-wing militia groups and advanced conspiracy theories. While the newsletters were published under Paul's name, he disavowed the writings in a response to the New Republic's article. Paul said that the quotations do not represent his beliefs and that, quote, I have never uttered such words and denounced such small-minded thoughts. He did not indicate whether he knew who wrote the articles, but again noted that he accepts, quote, moral responsibility for not paying closer attention to writings published under his name. Alright, these are a few snippets from the Ron Paul's newsletter. These criminals who terrorize our cities in riots and on every non-riot day are not exclusively black males, but they largely are. As children, they are trained to hate whites, to believe that white oppression is responsible for black ills, to, quote, fight the power, to steal and loot as much money as possible. Anything is justified against, quote, the man. Another one is, my friend waved to the tiny child who scowled, stuck out her tongue, and said somewhat tautologically, I hate you, white honky. And the parents were indulgent. Is any white child taught to hate in this way? I've never heard of it. Order was restored in LA when it came time for the blacks to pick up their welfare checks 3 days after the rioting began. What if the checks had never arrived? No doubt the blacks would have fully privatized the welfare state through continued looting, but they were paid off and the violence subsided. Here's a quote, a letter to Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke. Duke's platform called, it's an error there, for tax cuts, no quotas, no affirmative action, no welfare, and no busing. Quote, tonight we concede the election, he said, but we will never concede our fight for equal rights for all Americans. To many voters, this seems like a plain good sense. Duke carried baggage from his past, but the voters were willing to overlook that. And if he had been afforded the forgiveness an ex-communist gets, he might have won. Another one is about gays. Well, gays in San Francisco do not obey the dictates of common good sense. They have stopped practicing safe sex. Oh, okay, here's a good one. Paul went to damage control mode and issued a statement on his website. The quotations in the New Republic article are not mine and do not represent what I believe or have ever believed. I have never uttered such words and denounced such small-minded thoughts. In fact, I have always agreed with Martin Luther King Jr. that we should only be concerned with the content of a person's character, not the color of their skin. As I stated on the floor of the U.S. House on April 20th, 1999, I rise in great respect for the courage and ideals of Rosa Parks, who stood steadfastly for the rights of individuals against unjust laws and oppressive governmental policies. So, as was expressed there in that last little sentence, the last paragraph, did you see any difference there? Like I said, let's assume that Ron Paul is a complete virulent racist. Well, comparing what was just written there, what we just read, and comparing to what he actually is quoted as acknowledging he wrote in response to it, they're written in completely different ways. One of them has a kind of humorous tone. Even three of these articles, there are three of the little statements that I just read are written in it seems like by different people. One of them has a very harsh, contradictory tone, and another one has a humorous kind of making fun of them, and one is a sort of an apologist, but still racist tone. So I mean, these are like three different people. Whereas when Ron Paul acknowledges that he wrote something, you can tell his brogue, his kind of poise, his prose, and it becomes kind of obvious that if he did write this, he must have quite a few different, personalities. He has to be quite the talented schizophrenic. So that's just part of the fact that you just can't believe this. I mean, I think it was. Then they try to take Martin Luther King and destroy and tarnish his name. They, call him a communist. Well, this is the same type of thing. How just because he went to the same restaurant with somebody that he's now a communist, just because he went to a. I'm just gonna let me just bring up the facts. Let's not make up anything here. We're gonna bring you nothing but the best. Alright, I'm going to go over this really fast here. Debunking the quote Ron Paul is a racist myth once and for all. Ignore that. Anyway, with many anti-Ron Paul, pro-civil liberties leftists being attracted by Ron Paul's candidacy, the left-wing blogosphere has been very active this year in throwing the racist charge at him throughout the year. Lately, Coase has pretty much made the blog the daily Ron Paul is a racist reminder, oddly spending lots of time trashing him while stating he has absolutely no fear of his candidacy and labeling him a fringer who has no chance of winning. Why spend time on him if you're not worried about him, Marcos? Don't you think that that's a waste of time? Now is the time to set the record straight and to do a little bit of critical thinking. Firstly, I submit to everyone this little nugget from Freedom Under Siege, page 14, which was published 5 years before the infamous 1992 news.